All right, let's take a look at this lesson plan project. So after going over and learning about podcasts in our class, we really began listening to them, and I utilized them in my science and social studies. And the students have really enjoyed that. So we decided to kind of modify one of our RCD tasks and make our own podcasts through our ELA. So our county provides this curriculum that we have to follow for ELA called Rigorous Curriculum Design. They give us flexibility in how it's implemented, though, so that's where I was able to kind of take some liberties in these implementation strategies and really utilize a lot more of this technology. The first two tasks are pretty much still paper and pencil. They have to read and study various fairy tales and myths of different perspectives and diverse cultures. And then they have to fill out a graphic organizer to compare and contrast two different versions of the same fairy tale. And then they have to create their own narrative version or fractured fairy tale of a myth or fairy tale that has been changed to reflect that first person perspective. Then from there, we really take their narrative piece, and that's where we start to really jump off and use more technology and use more of that cooperative learning and collaborative efforts with our groups. So for task 3, students had to log into their Office 365 and access Visio, which is a great tool for different charts and graphs. And we modified and modeled in class how we could use their Venn diagram template and use it to compare and contrast their narrative version to the original. And then they had to come up with, per the rubric, 3 differences and 3 similarities. So once they have created this in their Visio accounts, they then had to save it as a PDF, and they had to come in and post it onto our class Padlet so that everyone could see the differences and that comparing and contrasting between the various fairy tales and the various versions. So I pinned my example here at the top that we did in class together and kept it pinned with the instructions right here at the bottom beneath the picture, and they had to add theirs on. I moved a few of them down below to hide student names and work, but they're all down in here. And that was task 3. So originally this Venn diagram was on paper and pencil with the original units of RCD. And so we made just that technology modification, and the kids had a ton of fun playing with Visio and kind of learning how to manipulate those graphs. So it was from here, once they had done that and created their own narratives, that they then had to get into groups. They would look at the Padlet and they kind of chose their groupings based on some of the fairy tales that people did. And they were able to choose their own pairings up to 3 or 4. And they had to decide amongst themselves which narrative they wanted to turn into a Reader's Theater script. And this Reader's Theater script is what is going to be turned into our podcast. They had to include characters, dialogue, and had to have a full script version of this for as their planning piece for their podcast. Once they had decided and planned everything out, they had to create a promo reel to really hook their readers or listeners in this case and get them interested in their version of this fractured fairy tale so that people would want to listen to their podcast. So, for example, we have introducing a new version of the Three Little Pigs, and so on and so forth. Once they had that done, students really sat down and assigned each other roles on who was going to say what and act out the Reader's Theater to create their podcast. And that was posted here. We created a class one where they could all post on there. I showed them how to log in, and they all posted their own individual podcasts onto our channel. Once that was finished, they had to do a reflection and self-assessment to tell me what their experience was, what their participation level was in the group, how they felt they did overall, and different things like that. Each task had its own rubric, with tasks 1 through 4 being formative, and then task 5 had a summative and formative piece. The podcast itself was their summative piece, their self-reflections and self-assessment was the formative piece. So here is an example of the rubric. Within the rubrics, they had a paper copy and a version in their Canvas modules. So they actually had the links to all of their technology tools within their rubrics for them to click on and access. And then they had their directions here of their pieces. Then I always put a little thing of track your own progress as you go for the version that is glued in their writing journal so that they can keep up with that. Overall, they did really well and everyone enjoyed this project, including myself. Next time around, I think I would like to do a little more front loading on the whole Disney being the real version versus the regular fairy tales. A lot of students had that misconception, so that took a lot of time to kind of go back and re-explain once I noticed that piece in their graphic organizers. And then also I'd like to do a little more front loading and modeling with the editing of the podcast itself and provide some more supports for maybe my shyer kiddos with the Spark video. Otherwise, we had a great time with this project.